You're standing in a grocery store. You're holding a bottle of olive oil and a bag of chicken and a box of cereal. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you've noticed that all of it costs more than it did 2 years ago. You haven't thought much about why. Maybe you blamed the company. Maybe you blamed the government. Maybe you just put it in your cart and kept moving. But here's something nobody told you at the checkout line. The price of crude oil, the thick black liquid drilled out of the ground in Texas, or Saudi Arabia or Kazakhstan, had more to do with what you just paid for that cereal than the company that made it, more than the wheat farmer, possibly more than any other single factor in the chain. And this isn't a coincidence, it's a system. A system so deeply embedded in how the global economy functions that most people live inside it their entire lives, without ever seeing the walls. Let's talk about how that actually works. Start with the obvious stuff, and then we'll go somewhere less obvious. Oil moves things. Trucks, ships, planes, trains, they all run on refined petroleum products. So when oil gets expensive, transportation gets expensive. And when transportation gets expensive, everything that gets transported gets more expensive. That part most people understand. You fill up your tank, and you feel it directly, but here's where it gets interesting. Oil doesn't just move things, it makes things. Plastics are made from petrochemicals. Fertilizers, the ones that feed roughly half the planet, are produced using natural gas, which is often extracted alongside oil, and priced in similar cycles. Pesticides, synthetic fabrics, pharmaceuticals, industrial adhesives, the asphalt in the road outside your house, the packaging around every product you've bought in the last week. Most of it has oil in it, not as fuel. As raw material, so when you're asking why your chicken costs more, you're really asking a longer question. You're asking, why does everything, from the fertilizer that grew the grain that fed the chicken, to the plastic tray it sat in, to the refrigerated truck that drove it to your store, why is all of that more expensive? At once, and the answer most of the time is the same answer. One variable upstream has changed, and that variable is measured in dollars per barrel. Now let's get to the part that really doesn't seem like it should have anything to do with oil. Interest rates. In the 1970s, the United States was running on cheap oil from the Middle East. Then in 1973, OPEC, the cartel of oil-producing nations, decided, for political reasons, to stop selling oil to countries that had supported Israel in the Yom Kippur War. The United States was on that list. Supply collapsed, prices quadrupled in months. And what happened next is the part economics textbooks spend a lot of time on, but rarely explain in plain language. All that oil-embedded cost, the fertilizer, the transport, the packaging, the heating, hit the consumer at the same time. Prices for almost everything went up simultaneously. This is what economists call a supply shock, and the government's response to rising prices then as now is to raise interest rates. Make borrowing more expensive, cool the economy down. So a political decision made in Riyadh or Dhahran, a decision about barrels of oil, ends up determining whether a small business owner in Ohio can afford to take out a loan to expand their shop, whether a family in suburban Chicago can afford a mortgage, whether a university student can afford to finance their education. The oil price didn't just raise prices. It changed the cost of money itself. Here's where it gets stranger and more current. Oil isn't just a physical commodity anymore, it's a financial instrument. And the financial world has built an enormous architecture around it. When investors get nervous, really nervous, they move money out of stocks and into what are called safe haven assets: gold, government bonds, the US dollar. And the dollar specifically has had a unique relationship with oil since 1974. When the United States made a deal with Saudi Arabia to price all global oil sales in dollars. In exchange, America would provide military protection and buy Saudi debt. This arrangement, which never showed up in any textbook you were given in school, meant that every country in the world that needed to buy oil had to first acquire US dollars to do it, which meant perpetual structural demand for the dollar, which kept the dollar strong, which made American borrowing cheap. So the next time you wonder why the United States, a country with enormous debt, can still borrow at relatively low interest rates, part of the answer is an oil deal made 50 years ago. The petrodollar, a system that runs quietly in the background, almost invisible, until something disrupts it. And disruptions happen. Let's talk about what happens when oil prices fall. Because most people assume cheap oil is purely good news, and it's not. When oil prices crashed in 2014, they fell from over $100 a barrel to under 50. Oil exporting countries suddenly had much less money. Russia, Venezuela, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia itself. These countries had built entire government budgets around high oil revenues. When those revenues dried up, they had to pull money out of their international investments, out of the same global financial system, to cover domestic spending. That capital flight rippled through emerging markets. Currencies collapsed in countries that had nothing to do with oil. Pension funds in places that had never drilled a single barrel felt the turbulence. Cheap oil exported financial instability from the well to the rest of the world, silently. And here's the quiet irony baked into all of this. The same countries that suffer most when oil prices are high, because they import it, because they can't afford it, because it raises their cost of living, those same countries sometimes suffer when oil prices fall too. Because the financial system is so interconnected that a surplus in one place creates a deficit somewhere else. You can't win. The game is rigged in favor of whoever controls the supply. Now let's zoom out one more time, because the future of this system is genuinely uncertain. The argument you hear from optimists is that the world is transitioning to renewable energy, and therefore oil's grip on everything else is weakening, and there's some truth in that. Solar is cheaper than it has ever been. Electric vehicles are eating into gasoline demand in some markets. The story of total oil dependency is slowly changing, but slowly is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Oil still accounts for around 30% of global primary energy. The plastics and fertilizers and pharmaceuticals we discussed, none of those go away when you put solar panels on a roof. The petrochemical industry isn't going anywhere quickly. And the financial architecture, the petrodollar, the sovereign wealth funds, the commodity derivatives markets, that architecture has decades of inertia behind it. There are also new complications. As some countries race to develop electric vehicles, they need lithium, cobalt, nickel, rare minerals that come from a small number of places on the planet. Sound familiar? We may be in the early stages of simply replacing one commodity dependency with another, trading oil geopolitics for mineral geopolitics. The mechanisms might look different. The dynamics of control, the vulnerability of supply chains, the way a decision in one corner of the world ripples through everyone's grocery bill, that part might not change at all. So here's where we land. The price of oil is not really a number, it's a signal. It's a pressure that moves through the entire global system, through the cost of food, through interest rates, through the value of currencies, through the stability of governments, through the affordability of your mortgage, and the price of the aspirin in your medicine cabinet, and the plastic bottle it came in. And the uncomfortable thing about this is not that the system exists. The uncomfortable thing is how rarely we're asked to look at it directly. We're handed the final price, the number on the shelf, the number on the pump, and we're not shown the chain of decisions and dependencies that produced it. Which raises a question worth sitting with. If this much of the economy is controlled by the price of one commodity, and the price of that commodity is set, largely, by a small number of countries and corporations and financial actors, then in what sense do the rest of us have meaningful control over our economic lives? We optimize, we budget, we look for deals, we respond to prices we didn't set, shaped by forces we weren't consulted about, inside a system that was built before most of us were born. Maybe that's just how complex systems work. Maybe that's unavoidable, or maybe the first step to anything changing is simply knowing where to look.